All right, good morning, Doug. We're back with some viewer Q&A, actually Q&A from our file members. If you're interested in learning more about our private member group, you can click for information in the description below. Doug, first thing we want to talk about, though, is we want to talk about this Aspen Ideas Festival. Now, you lived in Aspen for a long time, so you're pretty familiar with the Aspen Institute. And so something was forwarded to you yesterday that you passed along to me. What was that?
Well, the Aspen Institute is having an ideas festival. I hate the Aspen Institute. I actually have come to hate Aspen. Let me give you a little preamble for all this. I call it the People's Republic of Aspen. And of course, the Aspen Institute, the presence of the Aspen Institute is one of the things that made Aspen what it was. In other words, a place not that was just beautiful, where you could go to ski and walk in the woods and things like that, but where leading world intellectuals would get together. And the Aspen Institute is a hotbed of intellectuals, but intellectual pursuits in all areas the world over have been captured by the wokesters. Anyway, this year, because it was so large, much larger than what Aspen can accommodate, I think that must be the reason, because it was at the Miami Convention Center. They had a conference climate. And the first thing that should have been a tip-off to what was going on were the two keynote speakers were Gloria Estefan and Kamala Harris. Now, here we have people that have nothing that distinguish them, except that they're Black women. Well, not Black, they're women of color. So you're ticking two boxes.
Right. Yeah, no, it seems like
color. And a third box would be no, absolutely nothing about climate.
Or anything.
Or anything, showing concern. So that's the first thing. And then, so I downloaded a program of events. And it turns out, I mean, somebody can do this completely accurately and count all the names. It turns out that about 2/3 of the speakers and moderators are not men, but they're women. So this seemed like a women's conference. And what do you know? In the little video that I think you might want to show, they talk about women and the disenfranchised as being most hurt by the climate situation, which is total and absolute bullshit.
Why don't I could share this video now, Doug, and then we can comment on it. There we go here. 1 second. Okay, it's loading. All right, see it. I'm going to go ahead and push play.
We do recognize that women and vulnerable people are often disproportionately affected by climate change, but women are not solely victims of climate change. They're a powerful solution.
We changed the world once, and we're about to do it again.
Climate change is a borderless challenge.
And then I like to see a world where we can reverse the damage that we've done.
If the pattern of deforestation that the Amazon currently has continues, the Amazon will not be a container of carbon dioxide, but will be a net emitter in less than a decade. So we must act now.
Scientists and activists, and in particular Indigenous land and water defenders, are not giving up.
We should have a lot more urgency as a country. Why are we building any school or any public building for that matter that isn't net zero?
It is also an opportunity to re-engage the country in a communal conversation.
I want to give all thanks to the activists and the leaders who've been in this space doing this work for years and years. It often takes that push from the folks who are outside to get the bureaucracy of government to actually move.
All right, Doug. Anything objectionable in there?
Well, the first thing that pops off just visually, and this is absolutely shocking, they're talking about the Amazon. And what do they show? They show a chimpanzee Well, those don't come from the Amazon. They're from Africa. So what's it doing in there? The chimpanzee. Well, they can at least show an Amazon monkey of some type. But
Right.
so this is all touchy-feely. It talks about scientists and activists. Well, scientists aren't supposed to be activists. They're supposed to be activist mentality free. They're supposed to be scientific investigators, not act. The whole thing is just screwed up from start to finish. This is shameful. And if you look through their agenda of events, it turns out most of them are sold out or overloaded. So this is a place that drew a lot of people to fill the Miami Convention Center, apparently.
Yeah, they also have this role that I hadn't heard of before. I'll bring this up here, which I thought was pretty interesting. They have, I didn't know that heat officers were a thing.
Yeah, no, that was new. And here's the most shocking thing. Talking about heat officers, one of them is from Sierra Leone. I mean, yeah, I guess they have a heat problem in Sierra Leone, but that's because it's close to the equator. I mean, this is a really backward African country that just got out of wasn't so long ago, a really nasty civil war. And you would think that heat in the capital city is not one of their biggest problems.
Well, it does create a new and interesting job, though, for the bureaucracy. It's a jobs program.
Yeah, sure. Lots of jobs, lots of people to be hired to enforce diversity, inclusion, and equity rules and make sure that ESG mandates are enforced and so forth. But I made a few more notes here. Let me see, other than the fact that 2/3 of all of the presenters and moderators are women, maybe somebody can check that out over the entire 4 days that these people were yammering at each other. Might be more than 2/3 for all I know. I've got, let's see, Monica Medina, Assistant Secretary for Ocean, Environment, and Science at the State Department. Oh, wait a minute. What's the State Department, which has to do with relationships? There used to be guys with top hats that had conferences about treaty. So I didn't know that there was a secretariat, Ocean, Environment, and Science at the State Department. That's a jobs program.
Seems pretty giant too, like oceans and environment. You know what I mean? Those are big categories. You think you'd specialize and have your own ocean person or something? I don't know.
It's like everything. Anyway, who are some of these other people here? We'll hear from Eugenia Cargbo, Chief Heat Officer for Freetown, Sierra Leone. A Chief Heat Officer, that's what we were talking about a moment ago. And then Cheryl Holder, Professor and retired Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Community Initiatives at Florida International University. These are the kind of people they have speaking at this goofy conference. So anyway, it's pretty hopeless.
But the thing is that if this were just a sideshow, then it would just be amusing. It would just be, it'd be a joke. But it's not, because they take it very seriously, and it's being this whole net zero notion is being taken very seriously by everybody. And like one guy in there said, why are we building schools that aren't, why are we building anything that isn't net zero? Like that, like those people that are actually they're intertwining the policy to not do anything, to not build anything that isn't net zero.
Yes. How can you have anything that's net zero? Because electricity is generated, unless it's nuclear, from even this is all completely insane. I mean, the tools that you use to construct buildings are run either electrically or by gasoline. Net zero is a chimera, and not just that; it's an evil chimera.
Mhm.
It can't exist, and if it does exist, it means
We don't.
No, exactly. It means we're going to go back to the Stone Age.
Right. Which is why they're having like, and a big part of this also is, the planned early obsolescence of coal-fired plants, where they're actually providing incentives. I don't know if you know this, but these coal-fired plants, they're paying them as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. There's provisions in there to pay them to shut it down early. Okay, so to compensate them for it. And if they totally disassemble it or recycle the entire thing, so it's gone, then they get a tax credit for the money they received.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
They want to make sure it doesn't exist, so it cannot be undone.
Yeah, these people virtue signal and like to pretend they're virtuous, but they're actually evil. And I define evil as being purposefully destructive. And that's exactly what they are. I've been shocked for years at how this whole trend towards wokeism, which has, there are many fingers on its hands, how it's been evolving and accelerating. And it's still accelerating. It's still accelerating. Around the edges, there are a few people that are saying, wait a minute, aren't you going too far? Or that's not quite correct. But the trend is still accelerating. So it's got to get worse.
I was just thinking about the reason maybe they have so many, people of color and women and other, at-risk groups or whatever, as the spokespeople for this, is it just kind of gives them a little bit more cover where, from criticism with these things. Because anytime, if you were to point it out, if you had a bunch of, white boomers up there, I think, any criticism they got might be considered legitimate, but because it's attacking women of color, diversity officers, blah, blah, then it's just more proof that white supremacy is dominating the US still, if you say that.
Yeah. I actually believe in the concept of virtue, doing the right thing, essentially. One virtue, which is overlooked today and never mentioned. Well, when it is mentioned, it's mentioned in an upside down, bizarre, averse way, is justice. And justice, one of the ways you can define it is seeing that people get what they deserve. Now, it's another question, well, what do people deserve? But I'm afraid that the United States is well on its way to seeing justice. And I don't mean social justice, I mean classical justice. And what it deserves at this point, with these horrible people running around and being elected and praised and pampered, it's going to collapse and it's going to be really ugly. Anyway, so that'll be justice. I always look at the bright side of things. The bright side of things is when things collapse because of idiots like this.
Yeah.
Widely believed, giant conference where people pay to come and listen to know-nothings yammer. Yeah, it's going to be justice. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, I guess that is a good thing. Well, speaking of justice, maybe we should jump into some of the questions from the file members, and starting off with the issue of the January 6 defendants that have come up. Tucker Carlson got apparently access to some of the tapes from the speaker, gave him access to the tapes, only him alone, which I don't like it. If they should have WikiLeaks it, and everyone should be able to go through it, but still it's out there. And he had several segments where he was going through it, showing that the case that the government was putting on was incorrect, or certainly incomplete. So what are your thoughts on that whole situation and the justice that we're getting there?
Yeah, I like Tucker Carlson. He impresses me as a decent human being, not always as intellectually honest, or as he should be. In fact, very often not intellectually honest, because he will just tell his side of the story, which is generally the right side, in my opinion. But he tells it in an often intellectually dishonest ways. And we could actually go through his past shows where he does that. But this expose that he's done based upon 40,000 hours of tape from the Capitol riot, it was quite amazing. It actually shows that it wasn't a riot. I mean, it was disorderly conduct by a portion of the mob, but not serious disorderly conduct, not disorderly conduct of the type that we saw in the BLM riots. It was, a couple of yahoos, that got out of control and broke windows. For all we know, they may have been FBI plants, because they do that often. Like this guy, Ray Epps, who is a notorious agent provocateur in the crowd. And he's never been brought to testify, or an investigation's never been made into this guy. So there are a lot of rotten things in this, certainly including the fact that the powers that be are decrying Tucker Carlson for showing the public tapes, not just selected tapes of violence and stupidity, but other things that took place and what really shocked me, I mean, it's just one thing after another. This is why, incidentally, you have to be aware of what's going on in the news. But on the other hand, being aware of what goes on in the news does nothing but, make you angry in an inchoate way, because there's nothing you can do about any of this stupidity out there. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that really drew this to my attention was the Wall Street Journal, which we'd like to believe is a business-oriented and reasonably market-friendly newspaper. They did an article on Tucker Carlson's Capitol riot segment. And it starts off by saying that it was criticized by Democrats and Republicans. Well, as Tucker Carlson pointed out, the kind of public Republicans that would want to withhold these tapes that he dug up and has displayed, they're really not that I have any respect for Republicans. Let me get that up front, but they're no different from the Democrats, especially people like Mitt Romney and who's that horrible little poofter from Louisiana, or whatever his name is. That
you're not thinking of Mitch McConnell.
No, he's a turtle.
Yeah.
God, he's got a Southern accent. I think he's from Louisiana.
See, is it Kennedy? I think there's some.
No,
John
not Kennedy.
No.
Although he's one of the people that criticized it.
Yep.
I'll think of it. He's the biggest warmonger in the Senate, which is saying something. Anyway, maybe I'll remember his name as we go on with this type of thing. So, going through the article that the Wall Street Journal wrote, and I might point out, I hate to sound sexist, but frankly, just as 2/3 of everybody presenting and moderating at the Florida Aspen Institute Climate Conference were women, most of the people that write articles are women today. In fact, most of the doctors and college graduates and lawyers, everybody's a woman today. It's part of the increasing feminization of the society. Mm-hmm. That's another story. But going into the article written by this person, Lindsay somebody.
Wise.
Yes. So it starts off saying, Democratic and Republican lawmakers criticized Fox News. I'd like an analysis. If it was proper reporting, there'd be an analysis of how many Republicans and how many Democrats. But previously on-aired footage. Well, she might ask, if she's writing an article on this, why was it previously on-aired? On what basis did they air what they aired? and not air this? That'd be an interesting question to ask a reporter. But of January 6th attack, wait a minute. Use the word attack. Is that the right word? It sounds like something that happened on December 7th, 1941, if it's an attack. Yeah, it wasn't an attack. It was a... So it's just the way they phrase these things. And it mentions that Carlson aired several clips showing Jacob Chamsley, the QAnon shaman with the buffalo horns. Well, I'd like some more information about that. I mean, here's an article. If people go back and read this, it's an article that tells you absolutely nothing that you didn't already know from. There's no, where is a younger version of Cy Hirsch when we need him? Okay, it's not there, but let's go on. It talks about speaking to reporters. Mitch McConnell, said that it was a mistake, in my view, for Fox News to depict this in a way that's completely at variance with what our chief law enforcement officer here at the Capitol thinks. Well, does that mean that the news media is supposed to parrot what some bureaucrat told them to think?
I think so. I think that's what usually happens.
It is what happens, but it's a stupid thing for McConnell to say.
Yeah.
God, a horrible person. How did a person that even looks like that, forget about thinks like that, become the Senate minority leader, or majority, whatever the hell he is? Then it goes into the fact that 140 Capitol and DC police officers were injured as a result of the attack, according to a bipartisan Senate report. Okay, but what does injured mean? And how does this compare with?
Well, even comparing it with like what happened, on the, where there was the BLM riots around the White House, where they set that church on fire, the number of Secret Service that were injured then. Like, at least having context like that to compare would be helpful, especially the type of injuries.
Exactly. And of course, that leads us to, for a while, they made a very big deal out of this one Capitol police officer whose name is Brian Sitnick, who they were all claiming was killed because he was hit in the head with a fire extinguisher. And of course, one of the marvelous things about Tucker Carlson's tape is that I think most people believe that Sitnick was killed in the riots by the rioters. Well, this showed that he may have been sprayed with some pepper spray. Yes, for that matter, it could have been by a fellow officer. We don't know who sprayed it. That's not investigated. But he's walking around, and then he dies of unrelated causes later on. So but it's just said like, matter of fact, it's like not a big deal that this was made into a major, major scandal.
In fact, I heard Biden claim that 5 officers were killed there. And he's talking about this Sesnick as one of them, but then another 4 who all, which I think this is weird, who all committed suicide, within the months following. It's kind of weird, isn't it?
That sounds like that's worthy of investigating. Why exactly would a huge number of officers commit suicide, if that's true?
Yep.
It's what crappy reporting. This is an article not worth reading, except to reaffirm one's belief that the news media is controlled at best. And then it says here, Mr. Carlson's show, Tucker Carlson Tonight, typically averages more than 3 million viewers. I don't know, out of a country of 330 million people, is 3 million a lot? I'm not so sure it is. But here's the thing. It says making it one of the most watched shows on Fox News. Wait a minute. I thought it was perhaps the most watched news show of any type in the country. What is there on MSNBC or CNN or NBC or ABC that's watched more? I'd like to know. How about how about some numbers on the other shows? So it makes it sound like it's just one of the most watched news shows on Fox News. This is crappy reporting. She could have at least Googled it to find out, but it's kind of snide putting it quite that way, I thought. And let's see, further on down, he said the video didn't include footage of the hallway where Ashley Babbitt was shot by police. Well, yeah, he said that, but it makes it sound like a baseless assertion. But apparently it's a factual thing. It's not that he said the video didn't include.
It's just that it wasn't included.
It wasn't included. So making it sound that he said makes it sound like, he was telling a lie, but apparently not. And then last, it says, Mr. Trump, who has falsely maintained that the election was stolen. Well, was it stolen or not? I'm of the opinion it was. But in a news article, you can't say something like Mr. Trump, who has falsely maintained. We don't know if it's false or not. In a news article, all she should have said was Mr. Trump, who has maintained, not falsely maintained. So this article is full of this kind of crap. And the quality of the Wall Street Journal has, in fact, I've been reading it for decades, because there's nothing else to read if you want business news, actually, has gone down radically. It's totally infested and infiltrated by wokesters these days. And this is a major article on an important subject, and I think it speaks for itself.
Yeah, it's very interesting because, it has the illusion of fact. You know what I mean? The way that it kind of, unless you really read it with a critical eye, which I think most people don't. I don't think people read things with a critical eye. It's, you left with the impression that that Tucker's probably doing something wrong. He's doing something on the sly somewhere, some form of manipulation. I mean, they prominently feature the quote from Schumer that he's never known of a cable host to so mislead their audience before. Something along those lines.
Really?
Yeah.
Did he ever watch any coverage of the Vietnam War, for instance?
Right.
I mean, how stupid a statement is that?
Yeah. I mean, let me find it from him, but he says, here's the quote. It says, I don't think I've ever seen a primetime cable news anchor manipulate his viewers the way Mr. Carlson did last night.
Well, he's either ignorant or lying. And
I think he's lying.
Yeah, he's lying. So I really applaud the fact that Tucker is calling these people out for being liars.
Yeah, he's not pulling punches on that. Which I do appreciate.
But the fact is, if there are only 3 million viewers out of 30 million people of the country, this is going to go nowhere. I mean, this is, as I pointed out many times in the past, peasant revolts almost never, ever succeed. So the facts are out on this, it'll go nowhere. The average person doesn't know, and if he does know, he probably doesn't care, or if he does care, he probably believes the widely promoted views of people like Schumer and McConnell and the rest of these scumbags.
I guess the only advantage I can think of related to this is that at least the people who are going through court cases about this right now, because this is in the public, their lawyers should have a better way of demanding, the tape to be able to maybe exonerate them, since it seems clear that the Justice Department totally withheld this information in violation of law, for the shaman guy.
Yeah, true enough. I think the odds are, though, it's not going to go anywhere.
I think you're right.
Even if it comes out in court, these things, it's not going to be widely promoted, and the average American is just going to be unaware of it, or won't. So,
well, and that relates to the next big issue. And now this comes from somebody's question about, what do you think about the Nord Stream situation? We didn't talk about Cy Hirsch's piece very much, but there's actually, the intelligence services, fortunately, of the U.S. came out earlier this week and revealed what really happened. And it turns out that some pro-Ukrainian group actually blew it up. So what do you think of that?
This is absolutely shocking that they would, as Cy Hirsch points out in his excellent piece, and this is something before he wrote the piece, we figured that was going to be the case, that it would only be in the interest of the Americans to do this.
Yep.
So they're going to blame it on some guys that bought some scuba gear and dove to 200 feet. This was a real serious operation. This is an industrial scale demolition operation. You don't just get some Ukrainian scuba guys to blow up the pipeline. I mean, the fact that they would try to sell this and expect it would be believed is, to me, shocking.
It's the funny thing to me is that it's like they're so lazy now about lying to people. They don't even care about having a cover story until after Cy Hirsch's piece came out. They were fine just leaving it, going, "Oh, the world may never know." Just
yeah. Well, but why are they doing this now? And the only reason I can figure is that maybe because the war is going so badly for the Ukrainians and the NATO forces, just the opposite of what you hear in the papers incidentally. But my understanding is that, well, the Russians are going to win, but maybe they're looking for a way to back out of this thing. Maybe there are some people in Washington that say, you know what, this thing could really spin out of control. And if the Russians win in earnest, we're going to have egg on our faces and we're going to look ridiculous in addition to chancing World War III. Right. So maybe blaming this on the Ukrainians gives them a reason to say, hey, you're on your own, kids.
Well, and then just an hour or so ago, Zelensky came out and said, quote, "We have nothing to do with it. Ukrainians definitely did not do this." He can see the writing on the wall. He can see that he is the scapegoat, that he is going to be hung out to dry.
Well, for once, Zelensky is telling the truth.
I know. That's a good point. That's a really good point. Yeah, he's in real trouble. He's not going to make it.
Well, he'll be fine, because as the Panama Papers a couple of years ago disclosed, he was one of the guys with bank accounts that law firm in Panama when the papers came out. I mean, it turns out Zelensky is worth $300 or $400 million. Did that ever come out anywhere? Does anybody care? No. The fact that he owns they say, $30 million house in Miami, has that ever been? No. What is a second-rate actor from Ukraine doing with all that money?
Well, and this was before the major money laundering operation of the last year and a half took off, right? So this is before the war. So imagine now.
And it's not like it's been totally swept under the rug that the Ukraine is where Hunter Biden was being paid off to the extent of hundreds of thousands of dollars at least. Nobody ever mentions that anymore. I mean, the news media in the US is almost worthless. It's for entertainment purposes only.
Right.
Actually, I only read it because I like to know what most people think they know. And I like to know what the powers that be are trying to shovel out there so I can figure out what I want to do, but not because I believe any of this crap.
Right. And they're making it easier than ever to identify what story you're supposed to believe, because whereas Cy Hirsch's story about Nord Stream, which is this incredibly well-researched, incredibly detailed, expose on what really happened. The super light on details, light on facts, light on possibility version that came out of the intel agencies last week or this week was, immediately picked up by all the major publications, pushed out the door like a well-coordinated product launch.
Yeah, it's true. And one of the things I do like about Tucker Carlson's show and a couple of other shows on Fox, Greg Gutfeld does this too. Greg Gutfeld is actually my go-to source for amusement and
it's funny.
Everything. It's where they will play back clips of various other news sources where they reliably repeat the same phrase. Each media outlet uses the same phrase for whatever the meme of the day is.
Right. Yeah. It's like the whole Build Back Better thing. You see that over and over and over again everywhere. Yeah. There's everywhere. It's ridiculous. Okay. So let me get some of these questions, Doug. First one here is, what decade by age did you achieve your most of your success? 30s, 40s, 50s, something else?
I think it's like compound interest. The earlier you start saving, the more you have at the end. So that's why I make the argument that you ought to try to learn and do as much as you can when you're younger, when you tend to have more enthusiasm and more time and less requirements and so forth. Okay, but that said, this is one of the perverse things about life. It's that as you get older, at least if you keep up the pace to some degree, it's like interest starts compounding radically at the end. So I think everybody tends to do more and earn more and have more when they're in their 50s and 60s and 70s. You have more connections, you have more knowledge. So it's too bad. I wish it worked the other way.
Yeah, no kidding. Was there a breakthrough decade though?
Breakthrough decade.
Yeah, like a period of time that changed the trajectory of what came after, Well,
in my case, what did it was when I wrote my first book, The International Man, and it came out when I was 30. And it helps to have a book which you can use as a calling card that not only supercharges your income, but supercharges your credibility and so forth. So it's better to do things like that earlier rather than later. And it's funny, because I was only 30 at the time. I had people come up to me and say, you're such a young guy. How are you able to write a book like that at your age? And a couple of times, because this happened more than once, I would say, it's funny you answered that question. That's a very shrewd question, because the fact is, you're not going to believe this, but it's true. There's a 16-year-old girl that I met, and she's a genius, and she ghostwrote it for me. And I look at him sincerely, see if, true story.
That's awesome. Okay. All right. Next question. Germany's BASF and Dow create over 50% of the world's petroleum products. However, BASF will have to throttle back its production because of energy constraints in Germany. So wouldn't Dow be a great investment strategy since it will take market share, presumably, from BASF?
Well, okay, that's a reasonable proposition. I have no idea whether it's a correct one or not. But listen, why not go right to the source? Right now, there are oil and gas companies that are yielding 10% in current dividends. And if you think there's going to be supply constraints in oil and gas, those dividends are going to go up, as will the prices of those small stocks. So I think that's a better idea than playing with a giant company like Dow, which is only an indirect play. Okay.
Yeah. Good point. That's great. Doug, they don't remember if you've discussed it before, but what are your thoughts around the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis?
I have absolutely no hope that DeSantis is a real person. I think he's a shrewd politician that figured, I mean, maybe he's smarter than the average Republican, which is not saying much. But so, yeah, I don't want to get on this COVID train. I'm going to be the maverick here, whether he believes that or whether he just thought it was smart politics. But he's no libertarian. He's no free thinker. I think he's just a smarter than average politician that planned things out. And it's so foolish of people saying he's our great white hope. He's going to kiss everything and make it better. I mean, people have been thinking that way about candidates for forever.
Right. That's the key. When has that worked? When has it worked?
Never. I mean, look, Woodrow Wilson, he kept us out of World War I. No, that was his campaign slogan when he was, and he did just the opposite. And the same thing with Roosevelt. When Roosevelt ran, he basically ran as a free marketeer against the horrible dirigist programs of Hoover. And what happens? It turns out that Roosevelt was by far the most socialist-leaning president that we ever had up to that time, or probably even since. And Hoover is smeared as being a free marketeer, which is just the opposite of what he was. So, look, politics is all about lies. And the only thing you can be sure about is people that run for office, especially major office, they're all liars and thieves and scumbags. They really are. It's a snake pit in Washington, D.C. And if they want to get into it, they're snakes.
Yeah. One proof with DeSantis, I think, is that if you watch some video of him speaking 4 years ago or 5 years ago, compared to now, you'll see that he adopted a set of mannerisms which are designed to copy Trump. So he changed his speaking style. He changed his, the whole hand motion stuff. He does all that stuff now. And and there's nothing wrong with that, of course, but it just shows you that these people are very aware of the way they're being perceived by others, and that it's very strategic, everything that they do, including the speech patterns and the gesticulations, where they're willing, like an actor, to adopt something that's not natural for them, because it's more effective. So, I mean, that's on the superficial side of things. It runs pretty deep, though, way beyond that.
Yeah, it's all about money and power. So, no,
Okay.
Don't support DeSantis. Don't support any of these people, because by supporting them, you're just feeding them power, them individually, and you're feeding power to the system. That's a mistake.
Yeah. And I think the trap that people get in, is that the lesser of two evils, like that kind of basic framing. But it's like, in my mind, it's designed that way. It's designed so that you feel like you have to be in the red team or the blue team, because as long as you're on one of those teams, you're trapped. As long as you're like defined by who you oppose, then you're trapped. And that's what they want. They want to keep you trapped and disempowered. Yeah.
And always remember, maybe he's the lesser of two evils, and you don't want the Democrat to be elected, that's for sure. But the lesser of two evils is still evil. So don't support it.
That's right. Okay, next question. With a multipolar world unfolding in front of us, and Doug's been a very great visionary and has rich experience in navigating through uncertainty and volatility, says, I'm eager to know what would be Doug's advice for people in their 30s and 40s who have deep roots, are bilingual, and have fairly extensive networks on both a personal and business level in both the US and China.
Well, it can be a problem, as people who had roots in Japan found out 80 years ago.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that, but I mean, with all of the talk about, starting with the Chinese spy balloon nonsense, to what they're now pinning it on COVID on them, trying a lab leak or whatever, that they could Asian hate, that kind of idea, which I think was just a joke before, not real before, I think actually could grow. That's interesting.
It could happen. Yes, exactly the way it happened with the Japanese. And the fact is that Chinese immigrants to the US tend to be much more successful and much richer than other groups very quickly. And that generates envy. So let's get the Chinese guy. I mean, it can very well happen.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. So basically, it's a multipolar world. They have the benefit of being able to, they have connections in both poles, the way it may end up, but but because of that, it could expose them to a lot of risk in the U.S. That's
And not only that, but the fact that they've been in the U.S. and have close connections with the U.S. In a wartime or semi-wartime situation, it could make being in China dangerous for them too.
Wow.
So best that you go to a kind of a neutral country. It's neither China nor the U.S. It's a big world. And those are two countries that you want to stay away from, I think, if you're a Chinese American.
Okay. All right. Someone asking for some advice on making a career change. This is a 32-year-old bartender at the Four Seasons. If you're going to be a bartender, that's where you should be, I think. I'd always wanted to open my own restaurant, but I'm looking for a way to work smarter. Restaurants are very labor and capital intensive with low margins and high failure rates. I'm skilled in product knowledge and hospitality and want to parlay those skills rather than start from scratch in a completely new field. Any suggestions?
Yeah, you got to come up with something new and different. You know, you're absolutely right. The restaurant business is a terrible business. I mean, it's subject to everything that can possibly go wrong, will go wrong, from theft to you name it. So if you want to be in that business, look, I actually thought about getting into that business idiotically one time in the past, but what I wanted to do was, this was in the time after the Soviet Union fell, when places like Rangoon and Bishkek and Ulaanbaatar and all these others, Soviet satellite cities, they had, because I'd been to all of them at that time, and there was absolutely no place in those cities where you could get a drink or hang out or even get a good meal. Well, you could get, you know, small entrepreneurs were offering local cuisine, but there were all kinds of uhuru jumpers that were flying into those places and looking to cash in. And I thought, you know, this would be a perfect time to open up a string of restaurants called Rick's Cafe Americain, and try to make it
like from Casablanca, right?
Exactly correct. And it would be fairly easy to make it work. You charge a lot of money for the drinks and the food, limited menu, but very good. So people want to go there, both international and local, but limited menu. And a wide variety of drinks. And the way you'd make it work is you'd put a casting call out to all the best looking local girls who all want to get the hell out of town and meet rich foreigners. And the rich foreigners want to meet the cute local girls. And they'd come in there. Okay, so it'd be a successful bar or restaurant because you got a gimmick, got to have a gimmick like that. But the way it really would have worked is the guy who's running the restaurant has got to be a real super entrepreneur, so that if he's putting people together, he makes sure that Rick's gets 5% of everything that's bought and sold, because it's like the local stock exchange. I think it would have worked. I never did it because you can't do everything, but I think it was a great idea, and it would have been a lot of fun, I promise you.
Yeah. I think you're right. If you're going to start something on your own, you definitely have to do something very unique. If he's looking to not necessarily just I guess I was trying to think earlier about what to suggest to this guy, but I think if you kind of have to, wherever you're at, you kind of have to look of the people you've met. What job is it that they have? What career are they in that you know what they do, you know what the work really is, you know about their background. Find somebody that you would like to be, or, you know, that you admire the work that they're doing and the success that they're having in it or whatever, and then pursue that. But I think I always feel like you have to have a very specific example of what's possible. Unless you're an entrepreneur and creating from scratch, you need an example. So if he's looking for a career change, you got to just think about the different people who he's seen be very successful.
Yeah.
Thank him.
Yeah. And one thing you might do in that business is maybe not now. I'm not sure because my finger is not on the pulse of the restaurant and hotel business, but I'm pretty sure that at some point in the future, there's gonna be lots of bankruptcies in the area.
Yeah.
And if you look around for those bankruptcies or entrepreneurs that are in big trouble, maybe you can supply the management and maybe you can raise outside capital if you can prove to them that you've got the management. And that's the way you do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Okay, next question. I recall Doug noting interest in nanotechnology and graphene in the, I guess, International Speculator years ago. Just wondering if Doug has any current thoughts on these texts given his contacts.
No, nothing current that's actionable. Okay. It's one of a half a dozen or even a dozen things that are going to change the world or help change the world in the next 20 years, but no, nothing in particular.
Okay. Let's see. What's a good way to speak to family members, parents who are brainwashed by the system and basically refuse to obtain precious metals or hard liquid assets as a sort of a fire insurance type strategy?
Yeah. Well, here's some good general advice. Don't give investment advice to friends and relatives.
Yeah.
Because if you're right, they'll probably just be envious. And if you're wrong and they follow your advice, they'll hate you and mock you. Yep. So you can mention that you're buying gold and what the argument is. Fine. Mention it. End of conversation. Now back to talking about the weather and the state of the roads.
Exactly. Yeah, I feel like these conversations we're trying to convince people of something that they don't want to believe. It never works. It's like what's the Jesus quote about let those with eyes, let those see who have eyes.
Hear and eyes see, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. This guy says he's in the UK and he's seeing a rise in pension funds owning residential homes and only building to rent. This seems to play into the you will own nothing and be happy thing we've heard about. Do you think there will be a time within the next 5 years where it'll actually be a good time to buy a home in the West or in the UK specifically? Just given the fact that there does seem to be this trend to own all the property and by these big firms.
Well, the way it seems to me is that as governments grow, and that's going to be true of local and state governments, real estate taxes are probably going to go up. And interest rates, I think, are definitely going to go way up.
Way up. So how much higher from here, do you think?
Well, the US government was paying close to 20% for a while. And what was the peak? Was it 1981 or 82 for on T-bills? So yeah, that was unbelievable that the US government would pay 20% for short-term paper. Yeah, so it could happen again and probably be even worse this time around.
Wow. So
what's that going to do to the mortgage market? So don't treat a house as an investment to start with. Treat it as a place to live. And if you make money on it, that's great. It's like buying a car. People are treating cars as an investment. No, it's something to drive. It depreciates.
It's consumable. It's a consumer item.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm not sure if you know the background of this, but the question is, in light of what happened to Peter Schiff's bank, are you worried about the prospects for Battle Bank, which is Rick Rule's forthcoming bank?
No, the trouble with Peter's bank, for all of his many virtues, I've never seen Peter as a professional manager. That's not his thing. So that was number one. But number two was an offshore bank. And small offshore banks the US government and the Treasury Department and all this, they hate them. So it was a tough business to be in. So exactly what did happen to Peter's bank? Has it been liquidated or what? I don't even know.
It is in that process of being liquidated, but essentially they're one of the I think it was 60 Minutes in Australia came out with a expose about his bank, suggesting that the bank was working with money launderers and tax avoiders. He's currently suing 60 Minutes for defamation about that, and I think he's going to get a lot of money out of it, because there's been no government allegations even that he's done any of this, and apparently there was an investigation into all this, and so that seems like he totally got swept up in some media canceling event, and then that caused then a run on the bank, which caused then it to go into receivership because he got below some capital ratio that he had to maintain. So I hope he gets many, many millions of dollars from 60 Minutes in Australia. I
do too. I hope he takes them to the cleaners, because like all the media, they're almost all, bad intentioned scumbags these days. So I'm sure Peter's on the right side of this thing. But speaking of, the banking business, being a small foreign bank today, even if you're run on classical banking principles with time deposits and demand deposits clearly and totally separated, and this is a whole different subject to talk about. Even if you do it that way, and there's a real need for a bank that does it that way, it's tough. Now, Battle Bank, in which I'm an investor, is first of all, it's going to be a domestic bank, so it's going to be a bank like any other from that point of view. And I know Frank Trotter. He's serially successful at running these type of things. And he's going to try to run that bank insofar as it's possible in the current environment in a very free market oriented way and profitably. So as soon as it's up and running, I promise you, I'm going to close every account that I have, or maybe all, but small convenience account where I can, with Wells Fargo, which I hate, and use Battle Bank, and I suggest everybody else do the same.
Yeah, when it comes out, we got to have Frank and or Rick on to talk about it, because I think it'd be interesting to hear, for the public to more clearly hear what their differentiation is, to Wells Fargo and all the others. So
that's right. That would be the time to talk about what makes a good bank and a bad bank, et cetera, et cetera. So
exactly,
when the bank's up and running, we'll do that with those guys.
Okay, just a couple more questions, Doug. Do you think, was there anything about the New Deal, talking about Roosevelt earlier, FDR, that planted the seeds for today's culture war? I mean, yeah, that's what he's asking.
Yes, absolutely, everything. As I look at lists of presidents, everybody's got their list. Who are the best presidents of the U.S.? Well, Abraham Lincoln's always number one. And Roosevelt is usually number two. And typically speaking, the presidents that are picked out as being the best are actually the worst. And Roosevelt was a man of his times. And his times, he had the same ideas as Hitler and Mussolini and Franco and Perón. They were all socialists. And everything that Roosevelt did is laid the seeds, serious seeds. I mean, they were laid before then, but I'm talking about planting many of them and watering them and fertilizing them big time towards the current bankruptcy of the US and class warfare, where classes of people owe things to other people, like Social Security, which was never anything but a Ponzi scheme. I guess Johnson, I'd put him in there as number 3, perhaps. He started with his Great Society, and he started Medicare and Medicaid. along with the Vietnam War, of course. So no, Roosevelt, horrible, horrible person from every point of view I can think of. And I say that as somebody, my father, little known fact, they were good buddies, the two of them.
Good buddies.
Was one reason why my father and I never got along as well as we might have, because he knew my feelings on Roosevelt, and you know, they were like drinking buddies.
Explains why you were disinherited so many times, I guess.
Well,
part of it
anyway.
All right. Let's see if there's anything else here worth talking about before we go. No, I think I want to talk about bank stuff more next week. Just some of these with Silicon Valley Bank and things like that are going on, and Silver Lake and this crypto bank. But we'll save that for next time.
Yeah, yeah. The scandal will be ongoing, so it'll still be timely.
Certainly will. Okay, we'll save it for then. And Doug, you have a great weekend. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. You too.